perspective from a couple different angles on what that really means, kind of what people think about and what's in the planning stages, and kind of what's missing, what the needs are, all of that. So we'll run the gamut on that topic, and I think have some good discussion. And hopefully you got a little bit warmed up. I don't if you had a chance to do the homework and kind of give it a whirl to see what sort of opportunities are out there, what sort of housing stock, if you were in various price levels and thinking about kind of what the city has to offer at the moment. And then we'll hear a little bit about what some plans are for some coming stock that will be in the next couple of years. So we'll have a chance to talk about that a little bit afterwards, but we were hoping that that would just kind of get you into the mindset a little bit. Did everyone raise your hand if you had a chance to be able to play around a little bit and do some of the homework? Good, so some has. Okay, great. Excellent. All right, well, I want to just kick off this morning. You know, it's always good to do a little bit of self-awareness. Sometimes we just, you know, with Zoom, you know, the more comfortable we get, we kind of just ease into it, and it's a little bit easier to not be kind of just cognizant of how we are and what we're doing and what we're bringing into spaces. And I think we're just going to take the next 20 minutes or so to talk about the superpowers, our leadership superpowers. And I think it's a good exercise that we'll go through to just think about what we're bringing into rooms, into situations that we're engaging with, thinking about what kind of collective superpowers we have, and just having a little bit of fun and getting us warmed up. So I would like to, I'm just going to share my screen real quick, and I lost it. Sorry, no, I'm not, I guess. Okay, so we're going to start out, if you would. Make sure that you have your chat open, please, if you would. We're just going to take a couple minutes to just, probably 2 minutes, to just kind of ponder a little bit. And I would like you to start by thinking of the superpowers that you notice in other people. So come up with at least 5 if you can, just type them into the chat. But we're looking for something you admire, something that makes people a good leader or a good friend, a valued team member, just attributes. And you should feel free to direct them to people, to the entire group. So if you notice something about someone specifically in the group, you can do that. So I will do Julie is a good listener. Putting that up there. You know, just kind of, I know a lot of you out there are great collaborators. So just kind of think about what you're noticing about in the group, and just some kind of superpower leadership qualities that you are noticing when you think about others. So let's just take probably about a minute actually to do that.
Sorry, I got distracted. You want us to just write them in the chat?
Yep, just write them in the chat. Mm-hmm. Nice. For those of you just joining, we are putting attributes of superpowers, attributes of leaders in the chat, just kind of thinking about what those qualities are that we admire in others for their leadership, also maybe for their friendship. Excellent. If you haven't, feel free to just kind of scroll through and see what your colleagues have added. So as you're looking through those, there could be something that really stands out to you or that you identify with in that list, or maybe you have something in your own mind, but I would like you to sort of focus on yourself for a minute. Thinking about your own leadership superpower, kind of what is that thing that you are especially good at? And think about, kind of dig deep. So I think of myself as a collaborator, and I kind of think about all of that means and bring people together, and I think collaborator captures it. So I think my word would be collaborator. Just kind of ponder. It's not a time to be modest, kind of boast, brag about yourself a little bit. And if you have that piece of paper, if you could write it out kind of large on one side of the paper. I'll just give you a minute to ponder that.
You want us to write just one really big? Is that what?
Yep.
Whatever.
Yep. Just.
Okay.
Yep. Whatever that word is. Okay, so now that you have your word, hopefully, you have it on a piece of paper written large, I want you to think for a minute about that superpower and think about the nemesis. Nemesis, let's think about the nemesis twist on that. So consider a person who effectively blocks your superpower. Their power has a similar potency than your own, Name it. What is that superpower that works against what you wrote? And if it comes out really negative, like I'm a collaborator, so a isolator, a divisive, person, those are all very negative. So if I think about it and I want to turn it into their superpower, what do they do really well? Maybe it is rugged individualism, or maybe it is something that I could turn, and rather than being divisive, to my collaborative approach. They tend to go at it in a by themselves, like to just march down a single path. So think about what that opposite is. What is the nemesis superpower that might block yours? And then on the other side of your paper, write that superpower for them in the other, kind of in a positive light if you're able to.
Wait, I'm sorry, Lynn, did you say on the other side of our paper of our
Yep.
good word, we
Yes.
write the nemesis word?
Yep, exactly. It takes sometimes it'll take a little brainstorming. So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and I would invite you kind of for the first round just to dig into it a little bit and see if people can help you think of other things, because kind of the point of this is that, you know, we get so stuck in how we look at things and what our approach is, and we may not realize that we are kind of fighting against a something that isn't clear to us, and that somebody is, you know, like, why do we have this block? Why is there this, my approach is so different than your approach? So maybe talk it through with folks. So I am going to put you into breakout rooms for probably 3 or 4 minutes in groups of 3 or 4 people. And this first round, I'd like you just to sort of shore up what you have, share it, see if people have, if they can relate to it, if they maybe have other words to help you kind of describe what that positive version of the nemesis attribute might be, and just have a chance to talk a little bit. I'm going to put you into breakout rooms for 4 minutes. Okay.
Good morning.
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 Kelly, what's your superpower?
What's my superpower?
Yeah.
I put down that I'm empathetic. I think I'm pretty good at that. What
I
about?
would imagine you'd have to be for your job too.
Yeah. So, what about all of you?
Patrick?
What about you?
I put down synthesis. So the idea of taking a subject and taking all the various ways of looking at it and pulling it together. I tend to think fairly logically, so that sort of structure comes to me naturally.
I see that.
I enjoyed philosophy a lot in college for that reason.
Does not surprise me. Julie?
Yeah, I think I'm similar to Patrick. I just naturally look for ways to organize things and find structure in stuff and find connections among things. And it helps me move forward with things. And I still like reading philosophy. I don't always understand it, but I feel my brain grow when I do it.
How about you, Megan?
I put resilient.
See that?
Boy, all those are great ones.
And I would say that the nemesis is someone who's vulnerable. I don't know how to be vulnerable. It's like a foreign concept to me.
I had the nemesis as someone who's laser focused, so they can take a singular issue and just drive down on it and go and go and go and keep that on track. Whereas I'm never able to just focus on one thing at the exclusion of others. So.
And I thought sometimes, if somebody is too much of a dreamer and can't move beyond just dreaming or visioning, I get frustrated because I want to feel something moving forward. But I recognize that everybody else, you need to have that in order to move forward. But if you just get stuck in that, I get very frustrated with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, empathetic is not does not have very friendly antonyms. So I was kind of thinking about it from terms of like just being driven, moving forward at all costs, feelings be damned. Oh, sorry, Megan.
Okay. This child hears more F-bombs and shit than any other child.
Mine do too. So that's comforting. You know, someone who's just not willing to, somebody who's driven but not willing to kind of be present for people who might be struggling or even able to understand that. That was what I came up with quickly.
To give you a different take on that, Kelly, because I several years ago when my mom was quite ill or dealing with a lot of different physical issues, and I was helping her with it. I always wanted to try to help her solve her problem. So, you know, she had lost a leg, so we were trying to think of more mobility things. And at one point she said, I'm just needing someone to listen to me. I don't want you to solve my problems. And I said, you know, Mom, I'm not intuitively empathetic in that way. You need to tell me.
Yeah.
if that's what you're wanting. And so, you know, it doesn't have to be a negative. It can be somebody that's going to be, hey, let me help you fix your problem, and trying to help, but not being empathetic in the way that you're wanting them to be.
That's a good way of looking at it too, for sure. Thanks, Julie.
The countdown clock always throws me.
Although as somebody who's structured, it helps keep us on schedule.
Yeah.
We could probably use that in our group meetings.
I guess you could have an analog version of this. You have in-person meetings sometime in the future and just have a big countdown clock on the wall to keep everyone on task.
We have these little cubes that people throw around, and there's timers.
Ah,
So you can set like a 2-minute timer, a 5-minute timer. I don't know all the different, but you can toss it around, and if you have 1 minute to speak, it'll go off, and then you have to pass it to the next person, or you can just put it in the middle of a room and say, we're going to talk about this for 2 minutes. Keeps everybody on track.
Welcome back. I put a couple questions to consider in the chat, just thinking about those, a little bit more about those superpowers and thinking about how they interact, kind of when you notice them coming into play. Is there one that you'd like to be able to add now that you've heard some others? Maybe something that you kind of wish was your the superpower that you led with? And then are there certain kind of nemesis superpowers in some of these situations that you're talking about? I'm going to reshuffle. Give you a chance just to chat a little bit more. So this time around, you'll maybe chat about those things, share each of your superpowers, and then just sort of chat about how it plays out. Kind of why is this important to think about and talk about?
hi, Adam. What was your superpower? Oh, Adam, I'm not hearing you. And it says you're unmuted.
How about now?
There,
Yep.
yes.
I put down problem solving as my superpower. And then for the antithesis, I put down someone who is hyper consistent, but what I really wanted to say was inflexible. So.
Hyper consistent. I love hearing these way of twisting the words to make it sound like a compliment.
What was yours, Austin?
There's been a couple of things I've been running around here this morning doing, so I didn't get a chance to put mine together, but I think I've got what the idea is, so I'll brainstorm here now. I think my superpower would be maybe like empathy or something, being able to see all sides of an idea or a topic. So I'll have to think about the antithesis of that and let you know how to spin it in a nice way.
Well, empathy was something that was in the previous group too, and resilience and synthesis. And so I think that folks recognize similar leadership qualities and thankfully recognize them in themselves. And that, yeah, I know the tendency is to think of the antithesis as being a bad thing, but I think sometimes if, you know, the pairing of two things might make it stronger all around.
Right. And I think I can definitely see where, you know, a different twist on this exercise might be looking at your superpower and describing it in a negative way, or talking about how it can be a downfall. And I definitely can see that with sometimes instead of just getting to a decision and moving on, I'm too concerned with hearing every single aspect and wanting to be sure things are fair, and or even if it's something this decision being made with something I already agree with, I'll take the time and go through that mental exercise to think about the other side. When it's like, why are you wasting your time? You've already got the decision made. So I think that's my version of coming up with the antithesis, is kind of spinning mine around.
Mm-hmm. Well, and each situation can be different. Sometimes you have the luxury of taking the time to really examine all sides, and sometimes you need to move quicker. And so part of a superpower can be the ability to recognize when's the time to have either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
Joe, you're muted and I don't see you, but it says you're in here. Do you have anything to add?
What about you, Julie? Did you participate in the?
Yeah, I said that I was kind of like you, Adam, that I feel I'm very organized, and so I really want to move forward and get things going. And so sometimes the antithesis of that is if folks are spending too much time being visionary and dreaming and not wanting to take that next step, I can find that frustrating. But I also then realize that they are a very important aspect, and I can't just plow things forward.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I think some of that has to do with the kind of work that we do and what we need to move forward with. And so it suits my organizational tendencies.
Yeah. I wouldn't call myself organized, but that's all right. Work in progress.
Oh, I'm a list maker.
I'm a list maker too, but then I start losing my lists. And then it's like, what's the point? Where was that? I wrote it down somewhere.
Well, the career I had before this was driven by deadlines. You could not break a deadline. And so I just learned to work within a structure of a deadline. I mean, news goes on at certain hours, and you can't be late.
What was your previous line of work?
I was an assignment manager for news operations, TV stations here in Wisconsin and in San Antonio.
Oh, okay.
So that person kind of determines what stories you're going to cover, assigns the crews, and makes sure that everything is moving on, so that and then works with the producers who time it out and write a lot of the stuff. But I'm kind of the funnel. It was kind of the funnel that everything went through. So if you missed a story, it was your fault. And if the story went really well, then the anchors and the reporters get the credit.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it. That's interesting.
It's fun, but you have to be flexible at times too, because invariably something big will happen at 4 o'clock on a Friday. And then you just have to chuck everything you're doing and cover the news as it's breaking. That's why it's breaking news.
Yep.
That's what kills me now, when they'll still call something breaking news, and I'm like, really? That happened at 10 this morning. It's not breaking news anymore at 6.
Right.
Not anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to remember, there was a movie I watched, like talking through that reminded me of a movie I watched, and now I can't remember what it was.
Like broadcast news or something? People always laughed in that one and said, oh, nobody's running a tape in at the last second like that. I'm like, yeah, that happens several times a week.
Well, I liked the Newsroom. Did you ever see
Mhm.
that show? That was really good. I think there was a few seasons of that. I really liked that show.
Yeah. Things have changed so much now with the 24/7 news cycle. So, I mean, that's just changed everything. And I've been out of it now for.
Welcome back, everyone. Keep your papers handy. I'm anxious to hear what your superpowers were. But I am going to go ahead and just introduce our first speaker. We have Dr. Ruben Anthony on, who's going to talk with us. And I think I'm just going to probably set him up right now. I don't know if you're, did we lose him? I think I lost him. Oh, there he is.
Hey, Lynn, can you show the video first and then I'll go into a conversation? Good morning, people.
I will do that. Can everyone hear him okay? Raise your hand or give me a thumbs up if you can hear okay. Awesome. Okay. We have a video to play first.
I'm concerned about where we go in civil rights. The politics of division has made it more difficult. The climate has changed and we feel like we're taking steps back. We have to go forward. The Urban League has been making a difference for almost 50 years. Individuals look to us to provide help. They pretty much help anybody who's willing to put in the effort. We think that jobs are most important to families. The best social program is a good paying job. I was looking for anything. It was rough. Actually trying to find a career is very difficult.
There were times where he just wanted to give up.
You're literally counting pennies. When I started having kids, I wanted stability. I want him to see me as a man that takes care of his responsibilities. It starts with an individual having a good paying job. We make a commitment to training, placement, coaching. I started off in their trades academy. Now I'm the production line lead for the Madison area school district. I love the job. This is the highest I've ever made in my entire life. Now I can actually afford to have my wife and my son on my insurance.
He kind of walked with his shoulders back a little bit more. His head was a little bit higher.
If you have a job where you can provide for your family, that's the greatest feeling in the world. You don't have to worry about going and asking anybody for anything. It changed me because it gave me avenues I didn't know I had. What we're doing is we're collaborating. They've been able to have partnerships with major corporations here.
Exact Sciences has high-quality jobs across the company. We have benefits on the first day of employment. Our minimum wage is $15 an hour. The partnership with Urban League really helps us connect with people throughout the community.
They're able to train people for good-paying jobs. So we think that if we can help families to be independent, that helps Madison move forward. We're moving in the right direction. They gave us a home. We were living with my mother-in-law.
And it was Devin's idea to go through the Urban League housing program. I thought we were going to get turned down like we did for every other program. So when they approved us, I was like, oh, wow.
I think that's the ultimate thing that you can do in America is be a homeowner.
I really want that stability for my son.
Now he has somewhere stable that he can grow up in.
people are really trying here in Madison, and we're having some successes.
One could always count on Urban League.
50 years of really serving this community, and we want to be here beyond another 50 years.
The Urban League can provide hope.
I'm so thankful for them. They gave me that push, and I haven't looked back since.
I'm glad that my son can see that his dad, struggled but made it, and that he can do the same.
I want him to see what it's like to be a man. And when he grow up, be like, you know what, my dad was a good man.
All right. So the video was on moving faster than it should have been moving, but you got the message from the video. Home ownership for African Americans across this country is a big issue. African American home ownership is more about 46% across the nation. In the state of Wisconsin, African American home ownership is 26%, and it's the third worst in the nation. For Dane County, African American home ownership is 10%. It's in the basement. So when we think about housing and home ownership in Dane County, the Urban League has decided that we can't afford not to be in the business of helping people build and become homeowners. A lot of times it's the home and the equity in a home that creates intergenerational wealth. And so often poor people and people of color are left out of having the opportunity to realize the American dream. Having home equity gives you the ability to start a business. It gives you the ability to have a retirement. It gives you the ability to establish a lasting legacy for your family. And so it's important. When I came to the Urban League 5 years ago, one of the programs that they were going to stop was our home ownership program. So we have a home ownership program that is currently, it was a 15-year lease to own program. And so an individual would get in, they would lease the program, and after 15 years, they would own the house. And we purchased 54 homes, and 50 of those homes have been given back to members of the community, and they become homeowners. We got 4 left. And so they were saying, let's stage the program out. But when I look at, the statistics that I just cited, and then when I look at, the fact that there's a 3% vacancy rate in Madison, so people want to be here, but people want to have affordable housing, I said, we won't stop. After we give out our other next 4 homes that we have, we'll continue to be in the program. But let me just talk some specifically about the first program, our home ownership program, 0.01, and then I'll talk about our new home ownership program that most of you might have heard about. So the lease to own home ownership program began in about 1992. And again, we purchased over 51 houses, and many families were able to benefit from that. After the end of the 15 years, the family pays like $1, and that property is transferred on over to them. So many of the families that came in the program, on average, they have less than $1,000 in their savings. 85% of the folks that took advantage of the first program were people of color. 65% were female-headed households. And the median size of the families that participated in the program is about 5, and 79% of the program had families of 4, larger than 4. So our goal was to stabilize housing, renovate the home, allow the individual to build equity. Sometimes the mortgage rate was lower than what they would have to pay for rent. And so we had no down payment. access to services from the Urban League like you saw in the video. And so families that participated in the program for 8+ years, they saw their cumulative assets grow from 8,000, cumulative assets grow from 8,000 to 248,000. They saw their household income grow from an average of 30,000 to 53,000. So it does make a difference when you have an opportunity to be a homeowner. Many of them, the average equity was gifted was about 51,000. So in total, for that program, the collective equity was about 1.5 million that was passed on to families. So that was definitely a good program. The program was a partnership where we had the Wisconsin City of Madison, we had Wisconsin Housing Economic Development Authority put in money from Section 42, United Way put up money, lots of folks put up money to invest in the folks that we work with. In 2017, we received a community partnership award from Mutual of America, saying that this was one of the best scattered housing programs in the nation. So it's been a really big deal for the community, and I think we were able to really have a significant impact. So now that program's ending, everybody says, so what's next? And I'm like, well, we're not going to get out of this space. So we went after a $5 million new market tax credit allocation that we got with a national organization called NCI. It's a National Community Investment Fund where they help with home ownership all across the nation. They saw what we did with the first program and they said, we'd like you to do something here in Madison. And we was like, yeah, that's what we want to do. But with this program, we can make people homeowners right away. They don't have to wait for 15 years. So with the 5 million, we're able to purchase 16 houses. And already, as of yesterday, we closed on our 16th house. And I can tell you, like, acquiring houses in this current market has been crazy and it's been competitive. And one of the things that we try to do is focus on South Madison, because we know that historically South Madison has been recognized or acknowledged as one of the oldest African-American enclaves in the city. And so maybe about 9 of the 16 houses will be in the South Madison area. But when we went after some of these houses, it was almost like a bidding war, because there's some individuals that are sitting around just speculating, just waiting for houses to come open and they buy them. Since Madison College located in the South Madison area, it's created a lot of interest about strengthening up this corridor. It's a healthcare corridor. New condominiums are going up, and some of the mortgages on the condominiums are like $2,000-3,000 a month. And so we're worried about gentrification. We're worried about pricing out, people who have been in this community for a long time now. They might not be afford to live here. And we're worried about the changing face of the community. So we're purchasing these 16 houses. And so the individuals who are interested in this program, they'll get nothing down, a house for nothing down. They'll get interest-only loan payment. And the Urban League is going to act as the bank for 7 years. So we'll finance the homes. The interest will probably be about 3.5% or so. But they'll have to stay in the house for 7 years. After 7, they'll have to take us out with a refinance. They get the home equity. One of the things that we'll also do is we're going to create like a wealth building account so that they'll have to put some money in this account. And that account will be available if they have emergencies, if they need a new roof, if they need a new water heater. If that account is not used at the end of 7, they get that money as well. And we expect that that'll be maybe $15,000 or $20,000 if it's not used for home improvements. So again, we began to purchase the projects, and the city has given us some resources to help, and we just think that this is opening up, greater access to opportunity for folks to wealth build and own homes here in Madison. And so we're excited about, again, the fact that we just got our 16th home. And so over the next few weeks, we'll be starting to bring people into the houses. We've got a budget to rehabilitate each of the houses to make the houses look nearly new. And so we've worked with Aldo Construction, NBK Construction, and Operation Fresh Start. Now, Operation Fresh Start is working with us, and so we have a training program that the young man that you saw in the video came through called the Foundation for the Trades. They'll be working on 3 of the houses. They'll be getting some experience in our training program, and they'll work on 3 of the houses that that we have here, so that they can get experience. And ultimately, we would hope that some of those folks that are in that housing program will be like the young man in the video, and maybe get one of these homes for his family. So that's the 2 programs that we have. And I would open it up for questions. I'm sure I've left some of the details out, but I wanted to kind of give you a sense of the 2 housing programs and the goal of the Urban League. Our goal is to, again, create greater access to home ownership, greater access to wealth, and then to kind of look to stave off the gentrification that's happening along the South Park Street corridor.
Excellent, thank you. I will open up to questions. If you want to post your question in the chat, you can, or I'm kind of watching if you want to raise your hand. But as you are kind of pondering, I do have a question about, are there other, I mean, this is a fantastic program, and it's kind of like, what can we do to make it bigger right away? Are there other efforts going on in the city that you think are kind of on the right track also, and so that we have multiple wheels spinning on this effort?
Everything that Habitat for Humanity is doing, that's moving in the right track. The things that Operation Fresh Start is moving in the right track. We need to have more affordable home ownership. I know the city and the county both, they have programs where they are helping families get additional resources, or helping defer the costs that families may face as they go into home ownership. So those things are moving in the right direction. But for us, even though it's only 15 or 16 families that are being affected, I believe in like sometimes getting those small victories, and that, if we can impact a small amount of families in the way that, you saw on the video that we impacted the young man, Devin, I mean, that's a victory. And then we look, because this won't be the last of the projects that we'll do. This is the second, phase, and already the company that gave us the $5 million in new market tax credits, they want to do more. But we have to make this part successful first. And I was telling people, I said, if we didn't get the new market tax credits, we would have figured out a way, because it is, Madison has to continue to be a place for affordability. So the affordability piece on these houses is from 60% to 120% of the average area median income. And so not only are we addressing like the 60%, the lower end, but at the same time, we know that there are young families that may have just graduated from college, and they may have a pretty decent income, but they can't afford housing either. And so it's not just for the folks at the total lower end of the scale, but it is to create affordability for new professionals and young professionals as well.
Great. And we have lots of questions coming in now. I did want to ask about how people apply, and like how many families do you expect to apply for the 16? So
Before we went broadly announcing the program, we had like 37 people already, apply, saying we were interested. After we did a press conference earlier this summer, maybe we got, another 50 people. But the problem is that, many of the folks that are on the list may not be eligible because of some credit history or the income. Maybe they make too little, or they just don't have the work history. we're going to be flexible. So if someone has like a steady history of paying their rent, on time, and maybe they've had a glitch because they had a student loan, that didn't go well, we'll be a little more flexible than the bank. But ultimately, at the end of 7, we have to make sure that we've given these individuals enough education about how to improve your home, how to maintain your home, but also how to maintain your credit so that they are bankable after 7 and that they can get financing after 7 because it's to our benefit because we're the banker until 7. So we want to make sure that the house is still good, they're managing the house right, and that they have good credit so they can get refinancing and take us out.
Taylor posed a question: how can the community best support this work for more affordable housing options? And Jim took it a step further and even said, what are some ways groups like LGM can volunteer? So maybe that's kind of a 2-part question.
Yeah, the big help is like when we have financial management courses, banks are stepping up saying we like to help. We like to have the community participate, that way as well. Some of the families, may need, sometimes help. And we've been pressing the city, who has given us some resources to keep that in mind because we had to pay probably more for some of the houses than you would pay for in a normal market. But since there's scarcity here, so some of the houses end up, being like $200,000, and so some families may not be able to meet that. So we're telling the city, if you can do anything to help us make the houses more affordable so that we can sell the prices of the houses for less than 200,000. So, I mean, funds, and donations that way, always help. That's where the rubber really hits the road.
Julianne is wondering if there's a city in the U.S. That in your perspective is doing it right. Is there a good model for us to follow? Obviously, you're kind of creating some of the models that others are going to be replicating, but where are you looking for some models?
Yeah, so I mean, the national people that we're talking with saying that this model hasn't been implemented anywhere else. Our first model that we did with having using low income tax credits to do scattered housing, that's being done in Milwaukee now by Gorman. They're doing that, quite a bit, but we were the first ones to start doing that. The model that we're currently using, this NCIF wants to do it with our other 92 affiliates that are throughout major urban markets throughout the country. And so if we get this right, eyes will be on us about, maybe replicating this in other cities. But to be quite honest, I haven't really unearthed another city that has used like new market tax credits, or low-income tax credits to do the scattered housing other than what I see Gorman doing in Milwaukee.
Can I just add, Glenn, I'm so sorry. Can I just
Please,
add a
absolutely.
second part on that? So knowing that Madison and Wisconsin is pretty much near the bottom of the list of how, effective we are at low-income housing, what state is near the top, or what city is near the top?
I actually don't know that. I don't know who's doing the best job across the nation. I just focus on, to be quite honest, focused on, doing the work here and trying to make a small difference here. So I can't answer that question because I don't know.
No problem. Thanks.
Julianne, that sounds like a good research project. I mean, I gotta see who we can look to. Awesome. Melanie was asking about if you have had successes in the bidding wars, or does that significantly limit or stop the negotiation and other offers are accepted? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so, with this project, we had to have we had about 6 months to get 16 houses, 5-6 months to get 16 houses. And so if we don't close on this deal, within the next, 15 to 20 days, we could have lost, everything. And so we went out on a limb and we borrowed $3.6 million on our equity that we have in our building here because we believed in this thing so dearly. And then WIDA stepped up and ended up leveraging, our money. And so we had money that we could go out now and get things done. And then the city ended up giving us $200,000 in TIF money. So we were able to go into the deal. Every house that we went to, we were able to go with like a deal already to present, or with an offer already to present. And so a lot of the typical people that were coming for the homes were not that prepared, except for one entity called JEK that's really buying up a lot of homes on the south side. And so we were successful, I would probably say, in about 70%, of the cases. And the last house was the most difficult to get. And like I said, we just got that one yesterday. And so we were pretty nervous about whether we're going to close. This house is in terrible shape. It hasn't been lived in 20 years. And when I walked into the house, I was afraid that my foot might go through the floor. But when I brought our builder in there, he looked at it and he says, it's going to take about $40,000 or so to rehab it, but they could do it. And I was happy about that. And I said, well, here's a house that has become kind of like an eyesore. The backyard is all grown up, and it really needs to be refurbished and given back to a family. So we've been successful, I'd say maybe like 70% of the time, but it was, each one has been difficult because we've tried to, maintain the cost, not get into causing gentrification on the south side and other communities. And so it's been a delicate balance, a real delicate balance, but we got 16 and I'm happy about that, and I can sleep a little better at night because we got the 16 to close on.
That's awesome. Do you partner?
No way.
Oh, there was just a question, and we were wondering if you partner with a real estate company or local partner that way.
Yeah, we partnered with Allison Maiden. She actually has her own company. She actually worked with us on the 15-year lease to own program, and then we work with she's Melissa Kandua. She has 30. It's called 30 acres or something like that. 40 acres, something like that. But she has a firm, an African American woman. So those two partnered together, and they were going out to find the houses for us. But some people came to us to say, "We see what you're doing. We like you to have our house." There was a couple who had moved to Canada, and they were holding on to their house, and they saw our advertisement, and they said, "I want to talk to you. We don't have any use for the house. We know that the Urban League is going to put this house to good use and give it to a family, and so we want you to have it." And they gave us a decent price for it. The Madison Community Development Corp had a house that they gave us as well for a good price. So it was, a lot of wheeling and dealing and, meeting people where they need to be. But a lot of folks like the program. And the last house yesterday that I got, the gentleman who finally gave in on the house said that he liked the work that we were doing. And so he knew that he really wouldn't have the time to bring it up fast enough that we could, put it back in service real quick, and he wanted us to have it.
That's great. You had mentioned getting the loan and feeling so good about this. Deb is just wondering if you fund the purchases of the houses through grants or fundraising or other programs. It sounds kind of like a combination, or other sources.
Yeah, it certainly has been a combination of doing it, but the primary source has been the New Market Tax Credit resource, and then the backing of that has been with WIDA, and then Johnson Bank actually loaned us the money that we were able to go and get the houses fast, because so we had to stick our necks out on the deal and use our own cash to acquire first, and then to just assume that WIDA would be good, for the state and come up with the backing, and they did. We took a lot of risks that when I look back, I'm like, wow, but it was worth it, and I think that Getting to the finish line over these next few weeks will really give us all like a sigh of relief because we finally have it together. And so now we have to focus on, as the bank, we have to do the loan origination. We have to do the actual potential underwriting. And then we may have to do the servicing on the back end, but we may use Associated Bank or Johnson Bank to do the servicing. And so it's complicated because we're not bankers, but we wanted to be in the best position so that we could be flexible for the folks that want to use the program, whereas the bank might not look at a person's rent paying history and say, that's okay, and give a person a chance. We wanted to be in the best position to give these people the best chance to become homeowners.
Excellent. Melanie was asking about the fact that you mentioned that condos at $2,000 to $3,000 a month. Does Urban League include or look for condos, or pretty much just single family typically for this?
Well, you know what? The last few weeks, we were really desperately searching, and we were going to get a condo. There was a two-family structure that had two apartment type condos that we were going to rehab because we needed to make it to the finish line to keep this deal together. So we would have taken condos, but right now we don't have any condos in the mix. They're all single family homes.
Cool. Deb, that's a great question. Do you want to pose that question? My internet is acting kind of wonky.
Sure. I just was wondering if the Urban League advocates or lobbies for certain government policies or incentives that help make the program more successful or allow you to at least have more options to fight against the gentrification.
We don't usually lobby, but we do speak out very strong for things that give families the best possibility to become homeowners. We speak out for sustainable wage, saying that we know affordability, $15 an hour is the minimum salary that people need to make for affordability. We speak out against the current situation that, Wisconsin is the third worst in the nation and not making a whole lot of progress fast, and that Dane County is in the basement. When it comes to moving African Americans and others into home ownership. And so we advocate that way. I've gone to the city council and to the county board and pressed them on different issues that way. So we don't lobby, but we do express our opinion, pretty strongly about how we need to help poor families in this community.
Julianne, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, hi. I'm just full of them today. I'm so sorry. I'm just wondering if you see any positives to gentrification at all. No is obviously a good, fine answer too. I was just thinking in terms of the partnerships, with Exact Sciences kind of blowing up, and if you are able to partner with Epic, all of that seems to stem from gentrification, and just wondering if you see any positives with gentrification or if it's just such a hindrance to the community.
I don't think those things stem from gentrification. I think those things stem from positive economic development. I think gentrification is when you change the culture of a neighborhood, and then people can't afford to necessarily live in that neighborhood. When I have a conversation with the mayor of the city, I say gentrification happens when development is moving much faster than planning. And a lot of times, plans are built and they sit on the shelf, but yet developers are out there making the deals and they're changing the face of our community sometimes without, adequate community input or without, the community's vision. So that's the form of gentrification that I'm talking about, whereas the neighborhoods become more affordable. I think that economic development can improve neighborhoods, and we've seen that, I think, with Exact Science locating where it locates, offer the west side over there. We've got a Southwest Employment and Training Center down there where it's a positive economic connection to the community by having exact sciences there. Also, I think EPIC, having EPIC locate in Verona, it has nothing to do with gentrification. It was just a smart deal, and that we have to look at that as a regional victory, for this region. Now, Verona has its own problems because of how they do housing. They don't let a lot of affordable housing in Verona, and that's a bigger issue about racism, structural racism in and of itself, opposed to EPIC causing gentrification. So I don't, and maybe there are some good things about gentrification, but I don't think that those two examples are good examples of gentrification. Gentrification happens like in my wife's neighborhood that she grew up in Milwaukee on 5th and Locust, where her dad is still there, and he's 91 years old a couple of weeks ago, and he's still independent, and but now he can't hardly afford to pay his property taxes because Gorman might have put in a house there now that's about $200,000, and his was 40,000, but now his taxes are too high for him to pay. Or gentrification is when you go to my old neighborhood in New York, you go to Harlem, and you see that some of the stoops and the brownstones that we sat in on as kids and stuff like that, now you can't afford, even kind of almost like walk in the neighborhood. That's gentrification.
If you have other questions, that's great. Thank you for your answer on all of those. I would like to just kind of harken back and invite you to comment on a session that we had earlier where folks had a chance to do some neighborhood exploration, and they went and looked at different areas. And there was a group that was looking at South Madison and saw lots going on there, and certainly learned a lot about a lot of needs in the area. And like I said, all kinds of neighborhoods were looked at. But we'd love your take on sort of what's really going great in the South Park or South Madison area, and what's sort of the number one thing that you are hoping to work on in the next coming years?
So the number one thing that I'm hoping to work on the South Madison corridor, because you would be here all day if I talked to you about the others. But the number one thing is that we have a small business hub that I'm getting ready to go into a press conference with Joe Precy on in about 30 minutes. We are hoping that we could do a small business hub in the South Madison corridor where we can bring small and minority-owned businesses together in kind of like an ecological type of way where they can support each other and be able to get support services on that site. There's a model like this called the Sherman Phoenix in Milwaukee, and the Sherman Phoenix came about as a result of the riots in Milwaukee, and a BMO Harris Bank was burned down. But the community and developers decided to come together to rebuild that bank and to make it a place where there is catering, small restaurants, candle shops, beauty shops, and just all this stuff. And most of them are Black-owned small businesses. I want the same thing, here in Madison. And so Joe Parisi is going to announce today that he's going to give us an additional $2 million for the site improvement in his budget. And we're hoping that at some point, the mayor will, alter her capital budget to put some money in it too. I think that when we think about, housing and wealth building, we also have to think about economic justice. And economic justice is one of those things where we give women, small businesses, and minority businesses equal access to opportunities and equal access to wealth. And so, we think that there's a lot of excitement around the South Madison corridor, and we expect to bring this place here and have it be a destination that when people want to come to Madison, they say, you got to go over there and see that small business hub in South Madison.
That's awesome. And thank you for tipping us off, giving us that, kind of preview, because we'll still be here when you're having that press conference. So
you heard it first.
We heard it first here. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. We're going to continue the conversation about housing, and certainly as there are opportunities to interact with Urban League or support Urban League, or if you think of us for a resource for something that you might need assistance with, please definitely keep us in mind. But we will keep learning and advocating.
Hey, can I do one shout out? I think I saw Tony Sullivan there. So,
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
Findorf and SSM are doing some great things in South Madison here. You know, there's a $75 million reconstruction project going on with the hospital and the clinic, you know, there, and Findorf is the lead there. You know, they have a strategy with the hospital where they're including minorities on that project. They have a 3 to 5% minority inclusion goal, where the city says you can only get 2%, and they're getting 7%. They have made a commitment to have 11% minority labor on that project, and they've made a commitment to bring on targeted businesses through what they call a mentor protege project, to have at least 11 companies work on the project. They're doing better than any city, county, or state, and nobody's making them do it. They're doing it because it's the right thing. We got to continue to see more stuff there. I just wanted to give Tony a shout out because he's making the magic happen there. So thank you, guys.
Thank you for that, Ruben.
All right.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. Have a great day.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a break so that we can get your full 15 minutes in. We will reconvene at 10, and we will have Kurt Paulsen with us this after, and in 15 minutes. It
He's
was
great.
cool to hear. Yeah, it was really kind of cool to hear about their housing programs too. And I think people were particularly fascinated with the kind of the, you know, thinking about making houses available and the program that they had to purchase houses, and how tricky that is in this market. It's kind of one of those factors. It's like, wait a minute.
Right.
It's kind of counterintuitive a little bit.
I'm trying to
All
share my
right.
screen. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Well, yeah, I needed to see your credentials or something first,
Okay.
and then I would be happy to. All right, share screen options. There we go. That should do it. Let me know if it doesn't. Looks like that works.
Is it showing?
Okay, it is. Yes.
Okay. Do you want to? Should I stop my screen sharing so you can introduce people, or?
That's okay. I'm actually going to go ahead and I will turn it right over to you. We are very pleased to have Kurt Paulsen, who's with us with UW Madison. Does really awesome things in planning, and has just kind of one of the best people I have heard speak about this issue, sort of from a larger perspective, overview perspective. So it was nice to hear from Dr. Anthony and some very specific things, but we appreciate your being here, Kurt, and helping us get a little bit bigger picture on what's going on with affordable housing in this community. We'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me, and wish I could be in person with all of you and see your smiling faces, but we're all becoming too comfortable with Zoom meetings these days. So, and I'm not actually up on Bascom Hill on campus, because if you were on campus, you would see that it's completely under construction right now. So I'm just using this background to remind us of better days. So what I want to do in today's talk quickly is just kind of look at the overall housing affordability in the Madison region. This will give you perspective of some of the challenges and issues that we face within the region. So just very quickly, we're going to spend a few minutes discussing the difference between what we mean when we say affordable housing, housing affordability, workforce housing, attainable housing, life cycle housing. Everybody uses different terms. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the trends and challenges in the Dane County housing market, and a little bit on how that's embedded within Wisconsin. Then I'm going to talk about who experiences the housing gap in our communities. And an important disclaimer, all of my data, even the new stuff that's 2019, is pre-COVID-19. So the main takeaway here is that housing in Dane County and the Madison region was in crisis long before COVID-19 hit. And COVID-19 adds just another layer of crisis and shock to an already overstressed system. So hopefully in the questions, we can talk a little bit about how the rental assistance programs from the state and the county and the federal eviction moratorium, how they're impacting housing today. But if you want more reading, I've done 2 reports last year. One on the state of Wisconsin, that's from the Realtors Association. And Lynn has these PowerPoints, so she can send them out to everybody. And then the Dane County Housing Needs Assessment. So if you're having difficulty sleeping, just read my reports and that will solve that. I like to think of housing affordability as a puzzle where multiple pieces fit together. We're talking about the units that we create, different prices, different sizes, different locations, the prices or the rent of those units, and then on the demand side, how households form and develop income, and how all of these fit together is housing affordability. So we can talk just about building more units, or we can talk about improving households' income. And I'm sure Dr. Anthony was talking about how one of the difficult challenges for Black and Latino homeownership in Dane County is the fact that the prices are high. But the other component is the fact that due to long-run discrimination, incomes are lower for people of color. So housing affordability is about how all of this fits together. And I'm sorry for a wordy slide, but basically housing affordability for a region is an overall measure of the housing stock. So we talk about whether housing is affordable in Madison or not. We're really looking at the middle, and we're looking at overall trends, right? So when I teach housing economics, this is kind of basic principles. In the long run, prices and rents should reflect economic fundamentals, and that includes demographics, incomes, construction costs. You know, one of the reasons why new construction is very expensive is that lumber prices have gone up 30 to 50% in the last couple of years, right? So when lumber goes up, housing becomes more expensive. But when housing prices do not reflect economic fundamentals, the most likely explanation is restrictions on supply. You know, unlike any other good, when the price of something goes too high, producers respond by building more of something. Other than COVID-19, which is its own unique crisis, the current housing crisis in Wisconsin is mostly a supply crisis. So unlike 2006, 2007, 2008, where it was artificially cheap credit to purchase homes, here we're really talking about a supply crisis. And the way to think about this is when a city or a region like Dane County, when we're adding people and adding jobs, but we're not adding enough housing, then prices and rents go up, and they go up faster on the low end of the market, which means that lower income folks get squeezed. So I like to say it this way: we'll never solve our housing crisis without more supply. But of course, more supply alone will never solve our housing crisis. There will always be people who will need additional financial assistance or special support in the housing market. Okay, so that's the kind of overall concept of housing affordability, but sometimes people use this term affordable housing to be much more specific. And here we're talking about whether a particular unit is affordable for a low or moderate income household. And there's 3 main sources of making a unit affordable for a low or moderate income household. There's a lot of the government programs that we can talk about later that you've heard about, federal and state programs on vouchers or tax credits. Nonprofits can make a unit affordable by being mission driven. And then we have in the Dane County region, actually, a large quantity of our housing stock is what we call NOAH, naturally occurring affordable housing. These would be much older units that rent per square foot lower than the market rate, generally not in the most desirable locations, not close to buses or shopping, or they might be significantly older housing units. And then people use the term workforce housing, and I'll explain in a minute how we get to that term. But workforce housing is a more broad term which says that we have a workforce in a community that earns certain wages and income in the job market, and then we translate into how much housing can they afford based on the income they earn. So in a few minutes, I'll show some slides about what are the wages that people actually earn in the Dane County labor market, and you'll see how that translates into the housing they can afford. So again, I don't mean to overwhelm you with numbers, but I think sometimes when people talk about housing and income, they have all sorts of ideas about what these terms actually mean. And around the county, I'm kind of the data guy. And so I like to just say what the numbers are. So I like to think of a 3-person family. That could be 2 adults working and 1 child, or a single parent with 2 children. So for a 3-person family, if you make $54,000, so that's a reasonably middle-class job in most other parts of the country, you would be considered at 60% of the area median income. And we always use housing statistics relative to the area median income to account for the fact that housing prices generally correlate with income. So one of the reasons Dane County is expensive to live in is the fact that we are a high income county. So the median family income, okay, that means half make above and half make below, for a 4-person family is $100,000. And that kind of is astounding to a lot of people, but that's one of the reasons why housing is so expensive in Dane County. So that if you make $45,000 in Dane County, you'd be considered very low income, or at half of the median income, 50% of the median income. Whereas if you made $45,000 as a family and you lived in Green Bay or Eau Claire, you'd be up much closer to the 80 or 100%, right? And so one of the things we just have to say is that housing is expensive in Dane County because we have a lot of income, right? And it's an expensive place to live. You can see that that family that would make $45,000 a year could afford a rental apartment that's $1,126. Part of our challenge in Dane County is if you look at what households who make below the median income, what they can afford to rent, you look at those numbers, and those of you who know our rental market, you know that there's just very few units available at that price. And if they are available, they tend to be of much lower quality. So when we talk about housing affordability, we talk about how much someone can pay. But it's important to take a step back and understand that what we're really talking about is whether you can afford a decent, safe, and healthy home with the income that you earn in the job market. And so if those units are not available, families do one of 3 different things, okay? If you can't find a decent, safe, healthy home for the price you can afford, oftentimes what families do is they'll spend more than 30% of their income. They'll spend 50, 60, 70% of their income to be able to live in a decent home or close to school or close to jobs or close to work. The other thing people do, and we know this from the data, is they move far away. So they might move to the outskirts of Dane County or even outside of Dane County and drive back and forth to jobs, and the housing is cheaper, but they trade off all the time they spend in the car. Okay, so when families can't find decent, safe, affordable housing at a price point that works within their budget, they either spend too much, which doesn't leave them as much money for health care, education, transportation, all the other goods that, or food, or they live far away in a lower quality unit and make up for the difference by driving everywhere. Then if you think about, this is the same income chart on the income limits, and this, now I've translated it into home ownership. So that same family of 3 that makes 60% of median income could afford to spend only $181,000 to purchase a home. And those of you from the Dane County market know there's no stock available at that price. I saw in the chat a question about income. So this is the standard definition we use in all of federal programs and the census, and it would be what we call pre-tax post-transfer. So we can talk more about that, but this is what we would normally call money income. Okay, if we think about the Dane County market, this is our overall challenge, and then I'll drill down to some more specifics. And Dane County is the fastest growing region in the state. And one of the things that surprises people is how fast we are growing. We are adding about 1.2% to our population every year. That's a robust growth rate. And we are adding in the last 9 years about that many housing units per capita. However, we are adding 1.7% of jobs every year. So Dane County, in terms of its workforce, is a jobs machine. Almost more than half of the growth of the state's job growth is in Dane County. Now, when you think about this, if you're adding jobs faster than you're adding housing units, that means that the only way people can take those jobs is if they live far away and commute in. So we have people commuting into Dane County from Greene County, Iowa County, Jefferson County, Rock County. Jefferson is over by Fort Atkinson, and Rock County is Janesville. So rents are growing faster than income. That's the kind of one of the main points I wanted to show here, is that even though we are adding jobs, we're adding people, and we're adding income, and we're adding housing units, as I'll show in the other slides, we are not building enough housing units fast enough to accommodate all of this demand. And because of both a shortage of supply and construction costs, that means that rents are rising in inflation-adjusted terms faster than people's incomes. And that's why my state report is called Falling Behind, because even though you're adding income, if your rent goes up faster than your income, you're actually falling further behind in real terms. So again, in Dane County, there's over 100,000 people who work in Dane County, but cannot afford to live here, and so they commute in, right? And if you've ever driven on any highway in this county, anytime between 7 and 9 in the morning, you know exactly what that looks like, right? So part of our challenge is we can't even produce enough units for the people who already live here, much less we can't meet the demand of people who would want to live here if there was something that was in an affordable price range. Dane County leads the state in what we call housing underproduction. So this data goes all the way back to 2006. And in an 11-year time period, we added 36,000 households, that is people who want housing, but only 25,000 housing units. So every year we underproduce housing. And that's part of our challenge as a region, is people look around, they look around in my city of Middleton, downtown Madison, Fitchburg, Sun Prairie, and it seems like people are building housing like crazy. And then I come along and I say, that's good, but we're not building enough to keep up with demand. And this is a statewide problem. This is from my state housing report. We used to build about 20,000 single family homes in Wisconsin per year, and somewhere around 12 to 15,000 multifamily units. I'm sorry, 7,000 multifamily units. Then, like everybody else, housing production fell way off due to the Great Recession, but we still have not recovered. You know, 9 years later, we're still down by half of what we need to produce just to keep up with population growth. And what does that mean? So this is perhaps a different way of thinking about housing prices than most of you are familiar with, but this is how economists do it. This is the average price to income ratio. And economists have figured out that 3 is a really good price to income ratio. That means if you make $100,000, you can afford a house that's $300,000. And here you see that in Madison, the Madison Metro, starting all the way back in 1999, house prices went up and have never really fallen back to some normal level. I'm going to skip some of these other slides, but they're in the package if you want. One of the things I do for the state is I calculated what we'd call that entry-level housing affordability index. And the way to think about this is, if you're a middle-income family and you're going to purchase a home with an FHA type product, so that's a low down payment, first-time home buyer product, can you afford the middle-priced home in your county? And Dane County, as you see here, is the worst in the state. And what that tells us is that for our first-time home buyers, for people wanting to enter the middle class, and certainly as Dr. Anthony would have told you, for people of color in our county, even with an affordable home mortgage product from FHA, you cannot afford even the middle-priced unit in our county. And one of the consequences statewide is, of course, that our home ownership rate has declined for all age groups, but has particularly fallen off for our younger families. And what this means is that first-time home buyers, our graduates from the University of Wisconsin who want to stay in Wisconsin and work here are having difficulty finding homes to afford. Now, part of that challenge is also, of course, if they're college students, they come out with a lot of debt, and that counts against how much mortgage you can take now. And so it's not just that houses are expensive, it is that the credit supply is more tight and it's harder to get a loan. But this also means, given to what Dr. Anthony was talking about, that we had the most significant decline in home ownership in Wisconsin amongst African Americans, right, over this time period. So one of the things we know from history is whenever there's an economic crisis, people of color get hit hardest. So Wisconsin's home ownership rate for African Americans is the 6th worst in the country. And that's why initiatives like what the Urban League is doing are so vital. Okay, switching on the rent side, Wisconsin, as in most states, had rents going up faster than incomes. Again, this is a challenge, not just for us in Wisconsin, not just Dane County, but across the United States. Rents are rising faster than incomes, which means people fall further behind. However, and this gets to what I want to talk about in terms of a possible solution, Wisconsin had the slowest rate of increase of rent because on a per capita basis, we built more multifamily rental housing than all of our neighboring states. Okay, I'm going to say that again because I think it's a key point. When we build a lot of rental housing like we do in Madison and the Dane County region, that slows the rate of growth of rent. If we don't build the rental housing and there's all this surge in demand because of jobs, people, and income, then rents rise really quickly. So in Dane County, as in the state of Wisconsin, by building a lot of rental housing, we've slowed the rate of growth of rent, but we haven't built enough to actually start driving prices down to an extent that would be affordable for low and moderate income working folk. Right? Another way to think about this is if someone comes to Dane County and they work at Epic or American Family and they're making a decent income and they can afford a certain level of an apartment and that unit doesn't exist because we haven't built it, then they're going to take the next available unit down. And that will squeeze on the lower end because landlords will obviously choose a higher income tenant over a lower income tenant. And it means that people on the lower end of the wage scale get priced out. So even though we're building a lot of housing and it's market rate, it's accommodating that demand that otherwise would push and squeeze on the lower end, okay? And how many units are we building in the central area of Madison? So and since I was gonna speak to you, I went and I gathered the latest data last night. This is from the second quarter. MG&E provides every quarter a really good report on the rental market. And I pulled out what we would call our central urban area, our central urban apartment market. That's all Madison, Middleton, Fitchburg, and Monona zip codes. And on the blue scale, you see that since 2004, we've built almost 20,000 rental units in that central urban area. I mean, that's what people see when they drive around, all these rental units being built. The orange line is the vacancy rate. And housing economists would say that a kind of target vacancy rate for rental housing is about 5%. When it's lower than 5%, rents go up and landlords get more choosy. When it's above 5%, then you start getting disinvestment and decline. So a healthy rental market is about 5%. There you see that on a moving average basis, Dane County is adding lots of units, but we still have very low vacancies, which puts pressure on prices. Who is our workforce? I made this slide long before COVID-19 hit, but now I have a new term for who these workers are. These are our essential workers, right? So these are the 25 lowest median wage occupations in occupations that employ over 1,000 people in the Madison region, right? We're talking retail sales, food preparation, janitors, cleaners, waiters, waitresses, personal care aides for people who have medical issues or for taking care of seniors, landscapers, preschool teachers, security guards, right? This is about 25% of our labor force in Dane County. And there are about 82,000 workers, and their average annual wage is about $26,000. Without these people, our economy would collapse, obviously. And, you know, we've learned since COVID-19 that these are the people who still have to get up and go to work and risk infection, whereas I'm ensconced in my nice home office. If we take these essential workers and look at what they can afford in terms of a home, a single worker can afford $665 per month. There are not many rental units in Dane County anywhere where they can afford $665. And that's why we have a lot of people who work in the service industry or home healthcare aides in Dane County who do not live in Dane County. They live in Janesville or they live in Jefferson County. And that means that they drive long distances. And that's also a real problem because if their kids get sick at school, right, how do they get back home when there's traffic or snow? They have difficulty getting to work. So it's both an equity issue that a lot of our lower income workers can't afford to live near jobs, but it's also an economic development and workforce development issue. Because as a famous workforce development specialist told me once, if you ignore your workforce, they'll go away. So let's just talk very briefly about who experiences extreme cost burden in the Dane County market. And again, this is people who pay 50% of their income in rent. So imagine if you think about whatever your income is and think about spending 50% of that just on rent to live. And in Dane County, there are about 15,000 households currently who make less than the median income. So they're essential workers. They're in the labor force, but they spend more than 50% of their income on rent. And this obviously is the most extreme cost burden anywhere in the state. I'm going to end with just another slide which illustrates the racial disparities in housing cost burdens in Dane County. And if you look at home ownership rates, even controlling for income, right? So even taking households with the same level of income, African Americans have a much lower home ownership rate than do whites, even for people making more than the median income, right? And so even controlling for income, that's why I think this slide is powerful. Obviously, historic and systemic discrimination means that people of color have lower incomes on average. But even controlling for the same level of income, people of color have a much higher housing burden in Dane County, right? So there's both that working at reducing income disparity, but that's only part of the equation because of the housing disparities. And that's the end of my presentation. I know there's probably a lot of questions. So I'll stop sharing.
Great. I would invite questions from the class to go into the chat. You can also, again, my internet seems a little unstable here, but thank you. Kurt, I did just want to give you a little background to get the class prepared. They actually went through kind of an exercise coming into today where they went to the tax calculator, a U.S. wage and tax calculator. We assigned hourly wages at $15, $20, and $25 an hour using their current real demographic situation, family situation, and did some calculations to see what their 30% of their income would look like, and then went and kind of looked to see what was available in that range just to start to get a sense of it. So I welcome the class to offer any comments you had related to that, but I just wanted to give you a background, Kurt, that they had that experience.
Yeah, thank you. And I see two questions in the chat, which I will just take. The first question is, what state is excelling at low income housing? And of course, the real answer is that no state is excelling at this issue. It's a nationwide issue. But we can look at, in comparative terms, which states are doing better. And in my state report, I do show all of our neighboring states, Minnesota, Michigan, Illinois, and Iowa. And on one of the reasons I called my state report Falling Behind is I thought when I first started that Wisconsin would be about in the middle of the pack, but on almost all of those indicators, we're at the bottom of all of our neighbors. So we can point you next door to Minnesota, which is doing better. Obviously, some states are doing better at low-income housing simply because they produce a lot of housing, and therefore the price pressures are lower. But the truth is no state is doing great, but we can look at what states are doing better, and we can try to copy some of their programs and policies. So there's, you know, in the state report from the realtors, I look at kind of various housing reform and policies that other states are doing in terms of finance, zoning, planning, those sort of issues. So there's a more comprehensive list there. Oregon, Utah, New Hampshire are all doing interesting work. Of course, this becomes fundamentally a question of politics, whether at a state level we're willing to spend the money and engage in the zoning reforms needed. So that hints at the other question from Deborah Hurst to the rate of new construction being so low. So there's a couple of reasons why new construction would be lower than demand, and it varies across the state of Wisconsin. So when I look in rural areas, and you know, one of the things that's come out recently from the legislature is more focus on rural and small town housing. If I look at Eau Claire or La Crosse, for example, or Wausau, where I grew up, you know, if you're going to build a reasonable medium quality home that is, say, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,800 square feet, right? Kind of what for many of us would be an entry-level home or a starter home. Even if the land was free, that home might cost you $260,000 to $300,000 just to build, based on construction costs. Okay, when the average price of a home in Wausau or Eau Claire is about $180,000, very few people are actually demanding or willing to buy a brand new home when they can buy older homes at much cheaper rate. So one of the reasons construction is low outside of Dane County and Waukesha County is that the price of new construction is so much more expensive than old construction that there's little demand for it, and so they build fewer homes. Same with apartments. If I gave you the land for free and said you could build a 48-unit apartment building, on pure construction costs anywhere in this state, it's going to be about $150,000 per unit just to build the apartment, right? And that means if you have no subsidies, you're going to have to charge a rent to recover your debt service and your construction costs. But outside of expensive areas like Dane County, the market rent is already so much lower that there's not going to be demand for new apartments. Now, they're still building some, obviously, because there's always a demand for new construction, but it's much smaller. Dane County is kind of the opposite problem, right? In Dane County, to build a new home, and I priced this out for a number of municipalities, I worked through a spreadsheet. Suppose I said, I'm going to build a small house on a small lot in Dane County, right? A 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,800 square foot house on a 4,000 square foot lot. So that's a pretty narrow and small lot. The cheapest I could build that, given the land, infrastructure, and construction costs, is probably about $370,000. Now, if I was a developer and I had that available, I know that in Dane County, I could sell probably 5,000 of those small houses on small lots. There's a huge demand for it, all right? But one of the biggest barriers, other than construction costs, is zoning and municipal approvals. Show me a city in Dane County that has a zoning that allows you to build small houses on small lots. It's not there, right? Even in good Madison or Middleton, where I'm on the housing committee, every time someone does propose new apartments, even on a busy street, so like a main street, there's all sorts of impact fees, there's construction delays, and a lot of the nearby homeowners will come out to oppose the development. So if you look at cumulatively, when you combine construction costs plus zoning, plus kind of local opposition to new construction, the cumulative effect is that we don't build enough housing to meet demand, and the housing we do build is thereby more expensive than most people can afford. Someone also asked about why is new construction so expensive? So we always talk about the 3 or 4 L's in construction, right? Land, labor, lumber, and I guess you could say legislation, right? That's local zoning, whether it's permitted, right? So a good rule of thumb is that building a new unit in Dane County, just in terms of lumber and labor, is going to be about $150 a square foot. And that's at bulk construction. If I know a lot of people here are in the construction and lending industry, it gets a lot closer to $165 to even $175 per square foot. Just multiply that by the square feet and you see why it's so why it's so expensive. And there's a couple of reasons why, right? Labor is expensive in Dane County because we have high income. Raw materials have gone up in price a lot over the years. And from a public policy perspective, there's only so much we can do to drive down the cost of construction materials. And I don't think we want to be in the business of driving down the cost of labor. We have a huge labor shortage in the construction and allied trades in Dane County. Ask anybody in the construction business, and they'll say that they're just always hurting for workers, right? Part of what the Great Recession did was a lot of construction workers, people in allied trades like HVAC or electricity or plumbers, actually left the industry. So one of the things we can do as a region in terms of public policy, and there are people working on this. You've probably heard it from the Latino Workforce Academy and even the Urban League and at MATC, but training youth or people re-entering society from various incarcerations in skilled trades, construction trades, would be vital because that's good work and it's going to be stable income. Part of the issue is, it's people of my generation and younger would, as people would say, would rather sit in an office than swing a hammer. So we have a huge shortage of people in the construction trades. The only other possible way to drive down the cost of a new unit of housing, and you've probably all seen videos of this on the internet, would be various sorts of factory built, prefabricated or semi prefabricated homes, right? And there's a lot of people looking at that in Wisconsin because if people don't want to work on a construction site because winter is cold, if we could build housing units in factories, either fully assembled, you just bring it to a construction site and plug it in, or kind of, you know, you panelize a wall or a bathroom structure, and then you just assemble it on site. That's kind of the only way possible to reduce the cost of construction, absent government subsidy programs. So that's the other obvious category, is that if you want people to build units and the market won't bear the cost of those new units, then you'd have to think about a government subsidy program. So let me just say a word about that. It is impossible in Dane County, and it's actually impossible in most areas of the country, to build a new unit of any decent quality that's going to be affordable for people of low or moderate income, absent some sort of subsidy. I'm seeing a couple more questions. So there's a question there about tax incentives, and that's obviously the way to reduce the construction costs, or to reduce the costs to renters, is to reduce the cost of construction. So where we have been successful in the Madison region is in combining the federal low-income housing tax credit program with local government financial support through TIF. And together, if you think of the capital stack of a building, if you lower the cost enough to a developer, then they can keep the rents to an affordable level. So just, I could do a whole couple hours on the tax credit program, but the basic idea is, suppose it cost me $180,000 all in to build a unit of housing, an apartment with land and everything, right? I could either borrow that money and then have to charge a high rent to cover my debt service, or the tax credit is an equity investment in the property, which in exchange for basically free money, it's an equity investment from the federal government through the tax credit. The rents are going to be capped, and income eligibility restrictions apply to the unit to make it affordable for 30 years, right? So the way to think about it is, if you have to build a unit at market rate in Dane County, maybe the rent you need to recover to cover all your costs as a developer is $1,500 or $1,600 a month. So to bring that cost down to what would be affordable for a lower moderate income worker, you need either subsidize your operating costs or subsidize your capital costs. And you can do that basically in the federal program by lowering your cost of capital through the tax credit. The alternative is on the renter side, you give households vouchers. That's what the federal voucher program does. And then they go to a landlord, find a landlord who will rent to them. And that voucher pays the difference between 30% of their income and what the market rate rent is. The basic story is that we have all of these really interesting federal and state tax credit and voucher programs, and they provide a significant source of affordable housing. But I think what the data would show is it's obviously not enough. So nationwide, of all tenants whose income would make them eligible for some sort of housing assistance, only about 20% actually get any housing assistance, right? So I think the key thing to keep in mind for policy is that the vast majority, 80%, of low-income renters acquire their housing on the private market from private landlords without any housing assistance at all. So I'd say for us in Dane County,
part of the solution is we just have to build more units, because if you don't have enough units, people go homeless or they double up. But obviously building more units is not going to make it affordable for our essential workers. It reduces unaffordability, but absent some investment in affordability, it'll continue to be expensive. So if I can, I just want to say a word or two about what Dane County has been doing with regard to COVID. So you may have seen that Dane County allocated some of its federal CARES Act dollars to a rental assistance program. Because one of the things that we know is that a lot of these lower income workers in our community are having great difficulty paying the rent, because if you're a bartender, if you're a landscaper, any of the people in that kind of essential worker category, and you've been laid off, right? The federal extra unemployment benefits disappeared at the end of July. And so I'm doing a survey every month of landlords, and we're really seeing that in the data, that there's thousands of people who just can't pay rent. And so Dane County allocated $10 million in emergency rental assistance programs. And they did that in July, and that money's all used up. It's all spent. The state allocated $25 million statewide, and that's almost all used up. So at some level, if you can do anything, and I'm not lobbying because I'm a state government employee, but if you want to contact your federal legislators and say you're really concerned about the housing crisis and Congress should do its job and pass rental assistance, right? If people are out of work and they have no income, they can't pay the rent. And if they can't pay the rent, the landlords can't pay their bills, property taxes, utility bills, debt service, right? So something's got to give, right? And now at the federal level, there's an eviction moratorium through December 31st. And that helps because we don't want people to be evicted and have to either double up or become homeless or search for housing during a pandemic. But at some point in time, the bill is going to come due. And either we're going to have to, as a country, spend $100 billion in emergency rental assistance to keep people stably housed, or we're going to have a mass eviction crisis in the middle of winter, in the middle of a pandemic. Does that answer? I think that answers most of the questions. And I know we're at time, but I can stick around as long as you need me to.
If you're willing to stick around, I'd like to just sort of put these pieces together. And if there are some of the folks in the class who wouldn't mind sort of reporting on your experience, having gone through the exercise, and then we can kind of maybe put some pieces together. Or I think now would be a great time to share your experience.
I'll actually share both the exercise and my own personal experience with relocating to Madison. So we were coming from Phoenix, where there's a really high rental market, and realtors actually make a lot of money in the rental business. And since we were new to the market, we had done one house hunting search, but just weren't really comfortable with making a home purchase. And my husband hadn't found a job yet. And so we were hesitant to put a stake in the ground in one part of town without really knowing where our roots were going to be. So it just, by the grace of God, really ended up finding a furnished rental single family home with a short-term lease. But it was like, it came at the final hour. I had already lived here for a month, was starting to get very anxious about moving my family here with so many unknowns and variables. I had been living with family in Fond du Lac and commuting back and forth to Madison every day, just in this interim period. So it was really insightful to have to experience that, you know, moving into a new market, and just how challenging it can be to find some temporary housing or something that was affordable as we kind of got to know the area. And then in the exercise, I now have 3 small children and a dog, and I was in the lower income range where I would only have approximately $900 to spend on housing. And so to find affordable housing, given our, you know, familial structure, trying to just find a 3-bedroom or even reasonable 2-bedroom apartment was nearly impossible. There were no options in safe neighborhoods or, you know, new construction type options. Everything was much older, or I even started looking outside of Dane County to find something, and that was even a bit challenging. So it was really eye-opening to see what families with multiple children and animals would have to go through.
Yeah, the Dane County market is woefully undersupplied in anything that's more than 2 bedrooms. So if you're looking for a 3-bedroom apartment, good luck. There's very few of them anywhere around. And so part of your situation illustrates the fact that for many families with children, the only rental options are actually single family rentals. And the Phoenix market is much more developed in terms of single family rentals. But, you know, about 25% of our rental housing stock in Dane County is actually single family rentals. Or things like duplexes, which look like single families. So yeah, it illustrates the issue perfectly. Is you could either spend a lot of money, which you don't have, or you could live in Janesville. There was people who are from this area will appreciate this. A couple of months ago on Madison.com, there was a story that popped up and it said, "Find affordable home ownership in Madison region." And I'm like, oh, cool. They're going to show us where these houses are. And all the houses were in Janesville or Beloit or, you know, an hour away.
Kurt, can I ask with Megan's story, and I just know from my own personal experience, my husband and I feel like we really can't have kids because if we can barely afford our house or whatever, and then you add daycare on top of it, and like compared to all these slides, we make good money. Like this is not something that is, but I mean, we're young, and I just wonder, like, what does that change for the demographic of Madison moving forward if people are having to choose between being able to afford their dwelling versus they're like procreating?
Right. And so the child care is a whole different issue. And as you know, that's just incredibly expensive. And if you were to try to buy a home in Madison and both of you work in childcare, the mortgage and the childcare might eat up most of your income, right? And we know from the data that at least a little bit nationwide, when housing gets really expensive, people delay, you know, forming new households, getting married or partnering up, and they delay childbirth, as you were talking about. And so what it means for us as a region is we face the possibility of what we see in a lot of high cost markets of this real bifurcation of that we only have really rich people or young singles who work at Epic, which is great. We love them, right? Or lower wage service workers who can't afford to move. But then everybody in the middle, people such as in your situation, we already see it in the data. They may move out of the Madison metro region because they just can't afford it, right? And then, so then what are your choices? You can move to, Green Bay, you could move to La Crosse if you wanted to stay in Wisconsin, but we see in the data where they're moving, right? You're moving to Nashville area, you're moving to Texas, right? Housing is a lot cheaper in the South and in the West. And so one of the things we can do as a region is, of course, we can build more housing and allow people to build smaller units, right? So, you know, that starter home product, we have not built those in the Dane County market for 20, 30 years. That kind of smaller home, right? We can build a lot more of senior housing so that seniors who are living in their homes, right? People like my mom who still live in the 4-bedroom house we grew up in, they move out to a senior facility and then open up that housing for young families. We can do down payment assistance programs, but I'm just gonna make assumptions based on what you said. You would probably have too much income to qualify for a lot of those programs, right? So a lot of people are stuck in that middle where they they earn too much to qualify for any subsidies or any programs, but not enough to really afford a decent quality home in the Madison region. So as a region, we have to work on this together and say, you know, what do we need to do? And right now we're building a lot of apartments, and we should, right? Because we have that demand. But if we want to build a home ownership product, we really have to get creative in terms of bringing that price point down to something that's affordable. So I don't know if that's good news or, you know, we're going to have a difficulty attracting a kind of skilled younger workforce if there's no place for them to live. Go ahead.
I was going to ask a question too. I thought that the comment you made about senior housing is really interesting as well, and it's something that I feel like it isn't discussed as much in this conversation, but just from personal experience of house hunting with my young family, we have noticed the same thing, that, you know, sometimes more affordable neighborhoods are, or, you know, there's older housing stock that we would be happy to, you know, move into and fix up over time, but it really is a challenge. It feels like a lot of those neighborhoods have, so like we ended up buying a house in a neighborhood where it's all either young families or like 85-year-olds. And so that's an interesting part of the whole, I think, equation that isn't, like, I'm curious if we have data on how big of a number that is, or, you know, how big of an impact that segment makes. And then also, what are some of the barriers to, or some of the challenges, I guess, with you know, people wanting to move into some of those. So is it an issue of not enough senior housing? Is it an issue of senior housing that isn't of a quality that people want? Is it, you know, it's also like you don't want to kick people out of their houses. So what are some of those, I guess, incentivizing factors that could help alleviate that issue?
Yeah, given that my mom is 85, we've looked into all of these. So I can tell you, for any senior housing of any quality in Madison or Dane County, there's more than a 6-month waiting list. Part of the other issue is, for a lot of these aging silent generation and baby boomers, you know, you've paid for your house. It's free to live there, right? I mean, it's not totally free. You got to pay utilities and property taxes, but it's pretty cheap to live there. You've already paid for it. A lot of baby boomers and silent generation, they want to age in place and stay in their home. And as a society, we've always kind of accepted that and believe that that's good. And, you know, they've paid for their housing, so it's pretty cheap. Their income is down because they're retired, but the house is affordable. So we looked into this, and the data might come out soon. So I don't have the exact numbers, but there are about 15,000 housing units in Dane County, which would be single family, owner occupied, detached housing, where the homeowner is a senior who's living alone. Right, so that gives you some sense of the magnitude. And if we built more senior living facilities, whether these kind of more high-end apartments that transition to assisted or integrative care, I don't have a good idea of how many, but just eyeballing it, I'm sure some of the bankers on here have probably seen the market studies. You could build thousands of those units in Dane County. And probably subscribe them. But, you know, a lot of seniors don't want to leave their homes. And in that case, you know, one of the things we need to do is help perhaps provide a low interest or a zero interest loan program for seniors to rehab and fix up their homes. Because a lot of these homes are not energy efficient. They're not super healthy in terms of indoor air quality. But again, you know, someone who's 85 is not going to want to spend $10,000 to fix up the home, put in a new HVAC system, really clean it up. So as a community, we can, of course, both have a down payment assistance program to help young folks like yourself to both purchase and rehab a home, right? So that the mortgage may actually be more than 100% of the value of the current home, because you need to put in $15,000 to $20,000 of rehab, or to help existing seniors to reinvest and rehab their homes. But yeah, good question.
I have two things that I would love to add to the conversation. So Kurt, kind of as you said, my mom lives in Eau Claire, and lives in the home that we grew up in, 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom, and when we lost my dad about 10 years ago, she has this big house, and it's like, what do you do with it? And we looked into it too, and I'm, because it's like yard work and shoveling in the winter and all of that stuff. And she's paid off her house. So like you said, it's just taxes and, kind of the general upkeep. And we looked into like condo buildings, and everything was significantly smaller. If she moved into, just a rental place, she's just paying, there's no, it's kind of just her throwing money away. And so there isn't that incentive to downsize at this point. And so we've we kind of have circled back on that conversation every couple of years of like, what does that look like? You don't need to have this huge house to clean and, whatever. But so I think I don't know what the solution is, but I just know that that has been a problem for us. And the other thought that I had kind of before that piece was for the homework that we had, I was in the $15 an hour bracket. And so I had done, my calculations, and I was thinking about, I think a lot about this. I do the Big Brothers Big Sisters program, and my littles family, there's 3 kids, 2 parents. The mom works as, kind of like a health aide, making $14 an hour. The dad is unemployed. Yep. And they live, kind of in a not great building, 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, out in Fitchburg.
Probably built in the 80s, right?
Yep. Not great transportation. So for somebody who's already not making a lot of money, they had to figure out how to buy a really cheap car whose brakes are going out. And,
yep.
It's just a bad, it's just, there isn't options, for them. And they actually just made the decision, which is heartbreaking for me, but to move to Kentucky, where they have a little bit of family and they can get a 3-bedroom for a lot less money. And so it's that is real. And there's sort of the additional, just they're in a food desert, and just having access to different things and having access to jobs. And the dad's trying to get a job, but it's hard to, if you're limited by transportation. And so it's just kind of all of those things snowballing, whereas people who can't afford to live downtown could have, the access to transportation and resources. And so it just kind of feels like it's a big snowball that is really hard to disentangle and tackle all together.
Yep, that's exactly right. I mean, right, if you don't have decent, stable, affordable housing in a high quality neighborhood with good access to transit and food, right, then everything else kind of falls apart. It's a heartbreaking story, but multiply that by 20,000, and that's what life is like for people who are working in Madison and Dane County, right? And so that illustrates the idea that eventually people find a way to cope, or they leave the region. And at some point in time, I'm getting up there in age, not really, but eventually I will want to be in one of those senior facilities, and there'll need to be someone to help take care of me. And we may look around someday and realize there's nobody in the labor market who would take that $14 an hour job as a home health care aide, because they've all moved to different parts of the country, right? So it really is a workforce and economic development issue that we are increasingly becoming looking like a kind of a coastal city in terms of its expense and kind of income inequality.
I have another, I guess, question or comment with the transportation has been noted a couple of times, and I think about I know you kind of said it in jest, but about the idea of affordable housing in Janesville. And I think when you look at all of the factors that have contributed to making housing expensive in a market like Madison, like, not that there's nothing that can be done, but they're all big issues and somewhat intractable, and some progress can be made. But in the meantime, I wonder if any cost benefit analyses or any kind of numerical and empirical analyses have been done about the relative cost of tackling some of these big intractable issues versus just subsidizing transportation to places like Janesville. So what would it cost to just get buses or trains or some kind of public transit to say, hey, we already have a bunch of affordable housing in some of these outlying areas. Yeah, it's great if everybody could be close to their jobs, but in the short term, is it cheaper and better to tap into some of these sources? And everybody's not going to the same place, so I know there are challenges there, but are you aware of any studies or work that's being done on that front?
I am not familiar, but there may be some that I'm unfamiliar with. But yeah, as you were right, I was sort of kidding, but sort of not kidding about Janesville. There's an organization called the Wisconsin Partnership for Housing Development, and one of their development arms is they buy old homes. It's a nonprofit, rehab them, and then sell them to people with down payment assistance for workforce, right? And that's one way to kind of reinvest in older neighborhoods in a Janesville or parts of Milwaukee, right? And that's part of the workforce development. And what they will tell you is that all the people that they're helping to buy homes in Janesville are employed in Madison, right? And so that's, at some point in time, that cost benefit would include the fact that, all those people on the highway driving produces pollution, produces congestion. And if you drop your kids off at a preschool or daycare or elementary school, kind of before school care, at 7 in the morning, and then you get on the I-90 and drive up to Madison, you work a full day, and then you come home, you're not home until 6. The stress and strain on a family, as you all know, is would have to be included in that cost benefit. But as we like to say, that land use policy, yep, with the childcare, exactly. Transportation is basically housing policy on wheels, right? You can either build a lot more housing closer to jobs or closer to transit, or you'd have to give everybody a car. And the reason I put it in that context is, if we stop building the housing we need in Dane County, so that we keep adding jobs, but people can't build houses anywhere near transportation or near jobs, then first of all, in Dane County, all that beautiful farm field in the north and in the east, that'll be all gobbled up. But then people are just going to live further away and drive everywhere. And that, the horrible impact in terms of climate change and traffic death and congestion. But you're right, there's no easy solution.
I wanted to, excuse me, I just wanted to add right on to that, that in addition to the cost of, the cost benefit to family time and stress, you also have a disengagement in your community because you can't live in your community, or you have to choose between the one that you work in versus the one that you live in. And therefore, a lot of people, you're just not going to choose because you don't have the bandwidth to do it. And
right.
So when you spread out further, then you also have a disengagement in the solutions to the problem.
And that's why when we talk about workforce housing, we also use this idea that someone who works in a community ought to be able to live in that community, right? And it's somewhat shameful that so many thousands of people who work in Dane County can't afford to live here, right? And so they can't send their kids to our good schools. I'm not saying that school districts elsewhere are bad, but we have really high quality schools in the county. And shouldn't we want more people to be able to live closer to work and send their kids to our schools? And I'll just be honest, when I say that publicly, I get a lot of people in the Madison school districts, in the Verona, Middleton, who shake their head. They're like, no, we don't want more kids in our schools. because our schools are already overcrowded, right?
Well, and also our schools are only good for one type of person. Like our schools really aren't that good for people who are in low income brackets.
Right.
So
right.
I don't.
I just wanted
All
to.
right. Oh, go
sorry.
ahead.
No, that's okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that when I was doing the homework, what was frustrating was that I was in that relative position maybe 10 years ago. And because of COVID, now I'm in the same position that I was 10 years ago with the same relative numbers. And so it was just too stressful to deal with because I was looking at what options we have in reality. And they are either 700 square feet for a family of 3 or living in DeForest. And since neither of those are really options, I can understand that, you know, it just feels like it's a little bit of deja vu, except with a few more added burdens.
Right.
And
it was a stress.
I'm sorry.
It was a stress.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, and that's not the senior housing issue, which we're also dealing with from an elderly parent that lives out of state that we have to have live here somewhere because she can't live 12 hours away anymore, you know? And so it's an interesting, but there's no option for her to move here. And so we're kind of stuck with that too, that she just lives by herself alone 12 hours away. There's nothing we can do.
Yeah, it was a stressful market even before COVID. And then you just add on COVID and, you know, even people who thought of moving, they're not going to sell their house now. So, you know, the inventory of homes to sell and places to rent is way down. And people have no income or their income is way down. And so they're stuck. So I mean, people often ask me to predict the effect of COVID, and it's like, it depends on how long it lasts. I mean, we're looking at probably a triple crisis all at once, right? So I'm sorry to hear about your situation. It's anyone who's tried to look for a house or something to rent, or you know, I was just looking at what could we move my mom here and put her in senior, and there's nothing.
I think we all need to take a breath. Thank you, Kurt. That's a ton of information. Thank you so much for sharing time with us this afternoon and for all of that. I will make Kurt's presentation available to everyone. So you can go back and take a look at that. And hopefully if there are other questions, Kurt, we can be in contact with you and follow up.
You can Google me and find my
meeting.
email and send me any questions you have.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you all. Good luck.
Thanks. Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a break. Let's do the full 15 minutes. So it's 11:11 now. So we'll come back at 11. How about we say 11:25? And I do want to give you a chance to be in small groups to just kind of debrief on this because it's a lot of information, and I want you to be able to share any other of your specific examples that you had when you did the homework, if you didn't already share that. So let's go ahead and take a break until 11:25, and then we'll try and wrap up shortly after noon. Okay, thanks. Okay, I want to give you a chance, as I said, to go into breakout rooms and kind of talk about what what sort of transpired. And the framework that I want to give you for doing that is it's called a 5x5. So I have identified kind of 5 topics, and underneath there are 5 kind of responses. And so I'd like you just to sort of talk it through, but use this as your guide for doing that. The idea is that we're looking for you to capture sort of what did you hear? What were some of the ahas? What are things that if you were, things you don't think other people know that should be known? Things that maybe, we talked about policy, we talked about a lot of opportunities for change, what sort of things, what sort of questions should we be asking, perhaps of candidates for office or for policymakers in some other capacity. And then to just think a little bit about the solutions. Oftentimes in issues like this, we look at things from a really big perspective and go, oh my gosh, it's insurmountable. But there are those what we call 15% solutions. What small thing might help to make an advancement? And so one of the categories that you'll think about is what 15% solutions might you as a group suggest or think about? So I'm having a little bit of trouble with sharing the link on the document, so I'm going to try and do that. But are there any questions or anything about that? What you'll do when I send you the link is to make a copy of it and just have one person record it within your group. If I can't get it, what I'm going to do is just send you what the questions are, and you come up with 5 of them. So I'm not sure why I'm having trouble sharing, but if one person in each group then can just make a copy of it, and that way you can just kind of fill it in, and then you'll share it into that saved Google shared drive that we have, which is where it should be anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and put you in breakout rooms unless anybody has any questions or needs anything. I will remain in the main room, so if you have questions or thoughts, you want to come back, you can just pop back, and then I can put you back in that breakout room. Okay, enjoy your conversations.
Hey, everybody.
Hello. Hello.
We get questions yet?
Yeah, I don't. You must be still trying to send the link or whatever.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything pop up yet.
Yeah, when she sent me the link earlier, I couldn't access it, so I'm sure that's the issue she's having. So she may have to just send us the questions. While we're waiting, what were your impressions of the speakers? What aha moments did you have?
This is definitely, oh, Lynn's here. Let's see what she has to say.
Hello.
Hey, Ellen.
I just came into your chat to put this link.
Okay.
Could someone try it and see if you can access it, please?
Does we need access?
It does. Okay. I'm going to try and give you access. I'm not sure. I must have it set up under a different. Where do I go to see that someone is requesting access? And where do I change? I can't. Why? It's just a Word doc. It's a Google Doc in our shared drive.
Yeah, top right, click where it says share, and then there should be, hold on, I'm trying to do it. Share, and then down at the bottom, there should be something about like anyone can access with this link, or
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, but I don't see that in this document, so I think I'm just not sharing it to the right place. So, all right, so sorry.
No worries.
right, I think I've got it. All right, so anyone with the link now can, or try again and let me know.
Yep, it works now.
That worked.
Perfect. Okay, thank you guys. Have a good combo.
Thanks.
Okay.
So I'm excited to hear from all of you because unfortunately I missed the entirety of the two speakers due to work conflicts. So
Sorry to hear
excited
that.
to hit the highlights. I came back at like the very end of the last speaker and it seemed like a pretty heavy end to the discussion.
And can I say, I didn't mean to make it sound like I was homeless or that I didn't, like I was in a dire situation. We're fine. I just meant like, you know, it brought me back to when I was looking for a place to live. And, you know, with the uncertainty in the world, looking at what I could have in the future, it was very stressful. That's all. But we're fine.
No worries. No, I mean, this is one of my favorite sessions, I think. And it might help too that, you know, I really liked being able to like read some of the resources beforehand. And this is, you know, such a big topic right now. And then it also helped that I've been doing a lot of reading the past couple days about, I'm doing a 21-day Black Liberation Challenge, and it has been having me do a lot of research, and so like this week really aligned really well. But this also did, like, I definitely felt some relation to this topic too, in the fact that just like we bought a home in the past couple months, and nobody in my family ever owned a home, and so like it was mind blowing for me to realize like, wow, now I have equity. Like I have my house is bigger than where I grew up in. Like how lucky and privileged I am to now have that, but like now I have equity. Now I could turn around and sell this someday, you know, and like that talk about the equity and the wealth gaps. Like I, you know, have seen that and experienced that, and, you know, obviously still have a ton of privilege. But that just really hit home for me. So I think it was really like, you know, interesting and important to talk about, because I've definitely felt, Deborah, I think you were asking some of the questions like, well, what do we do? Like, why is housing so unaffordable? And I think a lot of my instinct has been like, well, Epic and, you know, these big companies bringing people in, and that we did kind of hear that a little. It's jobs are growing and demand is growing, but the, you know, housing options aren't, and so it's continuing to squeeze people out. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of my takeaway. Brett, we heard from Ruben first, and he was talking about the new program that Urban League is starting. I don't know if you got a chance to read about that at all, with making housing available. And so they did this before, and now they're doing it again, or kind of renewing the program, buying houses in sort of a lease to own option, so families can own a house without having the down payment. And what I really like too is that they're addressing some of the things like I think he called it a wealth building account. And so because part of owning a home is like there's going to be repairs, and so putting money into an account so that if, you know, something happens, the families have that money for repairs, and then if not, he was saying at the end they likely get that money back as well. And so I thought that was really interesting that they, you know, even saw that piece of it, like, because otherwise
part of, I think, you know, the mayor's capital budget, that $200,000.
I believe so, because he said that was, he said it was $200,000 that the city gave. But then it was also really overwhelming to me when he said like already like 80 families are applying and they have 16 homes. and some of those families probably won't be eligible. So
Wow,
you know,
that's I
just
mean
that
that's
like
a
high
hard
and then
barrier.
the low.
Yeah, it's like there's so much need, and like these projects, those programs can do so much good, but they just can't scale in the way that they need to maybe meet the need in a mass way.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the big sort of takeaway that I actually continue to get is that in general, society is willing to make tiny little steps, but no one ever just says, okay, we really need to just completely like redo what we're doing and figure out, and everybody has to come together and sacrifice a little bit to create a society that we all benefit from. Like at the end of the day, and that was the thing that kind of stuck in my head when he was talking about zoning. It was like, if Dane County is having this problem that is so massive, then why can't zoning change? Like, it doesn't make sense to me that that is one of the big barriers, right? Like, why isn't the government saying, okay, we need to look at this zoning and we need to change that? But then he was like, well, the people that live in the houses nearby, they're opposed to it. And so it's just this idea of, you know, not wanting to give up what you think is the ideal for a little, you know, for a massive change.
Right.
But then you have the pandemic that comes in that puts all of these crises together into one massive crisis, and it's an opportunity possibly to change people's minds to see how how necessary these changes are. But I don't know if that's possible. And so that's where I feel stuck, is just like, you know, when Lynn was talking about the 15%, I see that, but these are everything that everybody's doing seems like they're 15%, and the problem keeps getting worse. And so I just sort of get stuck in that mind.
Yeah. Did they talk at all? Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I was just curious because I think the one thing, like, and I'm not terribly, you know, well versed in housing in particular, but I think a couple things I've paid attention to are like in other cities. I think specifically, the Twin City or Minneapolis and then Portland both passed within the last year or so pretty massive zoning reforms related to residential housing that are really designed to hopefully empower neighborhoods and you know, certain parts of the city to really create that kind of missing middle of housing, which I think is really what's needed. And it's basically like, you know, relaxing zoning to the point where if someone like in a single family home has room in their backyard, they can build, you know, an accessory dwelling unit, or, you know, but the problem there, I think what's hard is like that, even with that policy, you know, you're still going to have neighborhoods that band together to, you know, not allow it or resist it. And it really comes down to, I think, education. Like like density is a word that, you know, people bristle at no matter what. And then when you talk about density coming in the form of, you know, more affordable housing, which people use automatically translate into low income housing, people are even less open to it. And that's what I mean. Like when I think of like, sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
Oh, no, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but.
Yeah, I think that my 15% brain just like applies to, you know, educating the public and just trying to win people over to say that, you know, more housing and increasingly affordable housing in more places, and spread, you know, throughout the community where folks have access to amenities like groceries and schools and, you know, things that we all, you know, appreciate. Just breaking down that stigma of what that means and what community means in that format.
I've been interested, sorry I missed the beginning of this, so sorry if this isn't on topic, but kind of going to some of the comments about the development process. I see that often for my job, and I think, you know, Madison is has always prided itself on being a very like interactive city where people, you know, like we listen to people's voices, and neighborhoods have really strong, a strong voice in the process. And while that sounds great for a lot of things, like that also is a big impact and develops in Madison, developments in Madison. I've worked with affordable housing developers before who have tried to build additional units, and it can be a very small but vocal minority that really sways the development process. So I have found that it seems like the people who are in charge, or I have found personally, but I hear a lot of developers also talk about the people who are in charge of the zone, approving zoning and planning requests and development requests, put a lot of weight in the we always have to have a public feedback process.
Right.
So like every development has to go before a board. Everybody from the public has an opportunity to come to that and speak for or against it. Nobody ever comes to speak for something. Few people are going to take time out of their day to sit through a 4-hour, 5-hour meeting to speak in favor of something. It's really like the people who are on a soapbox who want to be against something. And, a lot of times there are people who it's like they're going to be against it no matter what. And so not to discredit, that process can bring some valuable insights, but I think that the downside to giving people that much representation and voice in the process is that really it just holds back a lot of affordable housing and housing in general development that would otherwise be getting done. So maybe a more constructive way for us to do that as a city would be, we have a policy and we have metrics and we have parameters, and if you meet those planning parameters, like it's approved. There's not really like a decision factor of are we going to or are we going to not choose and pick winners and losers. It's like you are eligible or not eligible to do this development, and our opportunity to put our voices in is in the creation of those zoning changes. So like we can have public meetings and maybe a referendum and maybe some like voting. It'd be nice if it were voting instead of just like an open discussion, because an open discussion usually just gets railroaded by a couple of people with really strong opinions. So it'd be nice if we had a more representative input process to redoing some of these zoning changes, and then it just kind of like, this is the formula, and if you meet it, you will be approved.
And I would think that, that formula would have to take into consideration the things that our first speaker was talking about, when it comes to gentrification and the people that are living in a neighborhood having the say and ownership in creating a place so that they're not pushed out, right? Like, that would have to be part of the qualifications, right? Like when he was talking about Findorf's construction and how it was like 2%, but they're doing 7% when it comes to representation in the contracts that they're doing and the workers, and there was another element of it. What was it? The companies or something of that nature that are people of color or marginalized communities, and so that would have to be part of the formula, so that those people are not left out, because otherwise it's always the same people that would fit that criteria and that would get all the jobs. Does that make sense? Does that sound right?
I guess I didn't follow like what the jobs are. So
when you're talking about developers, right? Developing and building in particular communities and zoning laws and things like that, we don't want them. We don't want those. And you said a formula when it comes to the qualifications of people that would get those. What's the word? That they would get those projects.
Yeah,
right.
And I guess it's not just so much necessarily. What I was thinking of is more. There are different ways that happens. Sometimes the city puts out an RFP and says, hey, we have this parcel of land and we're putting an RFP out to developers to give us your plans on what you would do with it. But other times it's just a developer has invested in a site of land, and then the developer could be a nonprofit. Like in a couple of cases that I've experienced, it was a nonprofit that owns a site that wants to put more units on the site. And literally just for them to get approval to build on their own land, because a lot of times they may need some kind of a zoning variance or a change to what the existing zoning has. They may need to get approval to build on their own land. And so a lot of times they may need some kind of a zoning variance or a change to what the existing zoning has. So they have to have a public hearing process, and then that's when things can go sideways. And like projects have not happened just because of these public meetings where all the neighbors come out and say, you know, we think there's going to be parking issues, or like we think there's going to be traffic issues, and it's like, well, you think that people that you don't want in your neighborhood are moving there is really what you're saying. So it's more just that, like, what I meant by the eligibility is, here's what the zoning is, here's what you're permitted to build in this area, and maybe we need to be a little bit more open and have a wider frame for what that can be. And if you're proposing to build that in this area, then you don't have to have a public hearing. You don't have to get public permission to do that.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that when you eliminate that, while that makes a lot of sense, when you eliminate that, you eliminate the voice of the people that it would be affecting the most. And if it's something that's coming into that neighborhood, that the people in that neighborhood that would be harmful, and they have something like true to say about it, how can we ensure that that voice is also still heard?
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's where I feel like the appropriate place for that feedback is on the front end to determine what the zoning should be, right? Because once we've determined what the zoning plan is, that's the opportunity for the neighborhood to buy in. You're not going to get 100% buy-in from everybody.
No, but if you have a neighborhood like the South Side, or right, like, because that's what the Urban League speaker was talking about. That particular neighborhood. If you're saying, okay, we have zoned this property in order to be a multi-unit building, and you know, there are different. So if you've got that multi-unit building, that's the zoning, and we've created it so that that zoning does work for that and creates more housing. But then the people in that community, if it's something that's like not affordable, or if it's something that changes the dynamic of the community in a way that, you know, prevents people from staying in the community because they're pushed out of it. If it's like condos or something like that, and then it continues to build, that feeds into gentrification, as opposed to, you know, if they don't have a voice in saying what's coming into the neighborhood. And I guess that's the problem on the other side too, right? Other neighborhoods that are saying, we don't want low-income housing in this neighborhood. So it's a problem on both sides. And I guess I don't know how that would be addressed.
I mean, just from what I've seen, like, the examples that I'm thinking of that happening have been like neighborhoods that, like, they were trying to build affordable housing in their neighborhoods that typically pride themselves on fighting gentrification.
Right.
But it's like, well, until it's next to me. And then it's like,
right.
Yeah.
So
no, as I was talking about it, I saw the other side of it, and which is probably the one that is the biggest issue.
You have
right?
to think too about the people who have time to go to these meetings and speak, right? And it's not typically like people who are working a lot of jobs who are going to say, hey, I'm trying to fight gentrification. It's like people who have the time and the resources to say, hey, I don't want low-income people moving next door to me.
Yeah, I was thinking that's the more common. Yeah.
And so how do we balance that out so that the people that don't have time to come to these meetings, their interests are still represented and their voices are still heard?
To me, that's why
out by everybody who has the resources and the time to get what they want.
That's what was my original question, is like, why do we put so much stock in these meetings to begin with? Why do we even have these public input meetings where we make a decision about whether a development can or can't happen based on the people who can show up at 5 o'clock for this 3-hour time block? Like, to me, that shouldn't even really be a meaningful part of the process.
Or maybe there's something in this, this current environment with the pandemic of, does that level of civic engagement and participation move to a more virtual setting, or is that at least an option we have for these types of, development review or, neighborhood meetings, things like that?
Like a way to replace that with something that is more beneficial and more efficient than the people that like right, like you said, Jessica, the way that it's set up is what's causing problems. So what can we replace it with?
Welcome back. I sensed from the rooms I visited there was some overwhelmingness. Is that was that true in all rooms?
We didn't get to finish. We were having such a fruitful conversation.
Yes, which is perfectly fine. Those prompts are always good for just kind of helping you process, but obviously it's the more authentic engagement that you have that is most important. If you were kind of on a roll and you did cover a lot of things, just didn't capture them, please feel free to continue that, because I do think that sharing that is good. And then if you can send me a copy of it so that we can make it available to everyone. And he just sort of, Julianne, you kind of noted we were depressed. I mean, yeah, there's a lot to be. Do you want to talk any more about that?
I mean, we had Tanya in our group, and she started off right away saying, this is so timely because I actually had to step away to take a call. I have a client of mine who is calling me from a U-Haul because she's leaving. And like, we were just like, wait, seriously? Like, okay. So she just walked us through this situation, and, you know, like, she can talk more about it when she gets back, but like, it's here, it's in front of us, it's happening. And I think it's just so hard because we don't know if the eviction moratorium is lifted or not. Like, yes, there can be policies in place, but you also need to communicate those and get so there's so many different levels and layers of how, especially during COVID, but like how all of this stuff interplays with each other. And I think it's just overwhelming. And it's also just been like a terrible week and year for everything. It just seems like everything is politicized, and we're seeing the power that governments have. So it's just exhausting when you don't feel like you have a lot of options, and now we're like, it's just right in front of us. So we're just overwhelmed.
Yep. It underscores the importance of being aware and engaging, because it'd be easier and it would feel less depressing to step away and not pay attention. So, yeah. Other thoughts?
We didn't talk much about this, but in terms of the elderly and senior housing and aging in place, one of the biggest problems in Madison is the high property taxes. So even if you own your home, when the property taxes go up so much, you know, if you're on a fixed income, you know, seniors can get pushed out of their home because they owe, you know, $8,000 or $10,000 in property tax. And I'm not sure what goes into that, but you know, if you can't afford to pay your property tax as a senior, and then you're getting pushed into unaffordable senior housing, you know, that burden goes to your children or something. It just, that kind of thing is probably more invisible.
Yeah, that's a lot of the stuff that Jason Stein talked about earlier this year, when it is kind of that cycle. Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking about wages when I was looking at the 15%, wondering if that's, you know, I think it's part of the solution. You know, we're talking about, we were doing that exercise and the lowest was on $15 an hour, but, you know, the minimum wage in Dane County, we're talking about raising it to 10, I think, correct? So, I mean, that's a huge barrier as well.
When you were talking about the 15% solutions, Brett referenced Portland and their zoning changes on auxiliary units, which is something also that can address senior housing, where you can build the granny flat and kind of bring multi-families together in that way. So I don't know if anybody else talked about that as well.
Well, this is why I kept asking like what cities are doing things, because it just seemed like, I think it's really admirable that we're creating new programs here to see if they work. It doesn't change the fact that we're still third from the bottom. So if we don't need to reinvent the wheel, I think it's worth looking at what other cities are doing. And Andrea pulled up some good research. I mean, looking at universal basic incomes and giving, you know, folks just that little push that will get them to the next level. We talked about that. But that's why I was so curious as to what other cities are doing. And I found it a little strange that they didn't have those answers.
I agree with you, because typically what we're used to hearing is, you know, we're modeling it after this. And it's really, I mean, it feels like everybody is just sort of can only look down. Nobody's looking up. Nobody's sort of comparing. And nobody is obviously a generalization, but I completely agree. It used to be that when you ask that question, when you asked that question, there was a handful, you know, there were like 5 communities that were always kind of on the top of all of those things. And if you do hear anything, it's much more spread out. It's not like even just someone who's really kind of, you know, looking at a place. Minneapolis, yeah, used to be Portland, used to be, you know, Seattle, it used to be, and there were a lot of programs that were happening that were replicable.
Do you think some of that relates, you know, very specifically to the size and the place and the other assets in the area? You know, maybe not that you couldn't learn something from other cities that are doing it well, but you know, there's just like so many dynamics.
Right. Yeah, Nikki would probably know this better than I would, but I know that I think of the chamber and the references, there's always like these kind of comparable cities in terms of our demo and our size, if I remember correctly. There were some factors that they always looked at in the comparison. So we were always kind of tracking, and I don't remember what they were, but I know that it was definitely a chamber thing.
I think that it's been interesting too to think or to look at. I was really interested in Kurt's discussion of some of the like legislative and policy driven things that make housing more expensive. And it's interesting to think like there are things that are sometimes at odds. So as a community, like we have these goals that seem good for everybody, right? Like they seem like great ideas and like progressive, and it's hard sometimes to understand that those sometimes work against some of our other goals of affordable housing. And one example that came to mind right away is so a recent change for development standards has been stormwater retention. So because of climate change and because we're having increasing like extreme weather events and lots of rainfall, they have changed the requirements for stormwater retention on development sites, which doesn't seem like a bit, you know, it sounds like a good idea. Like, yes, we want to be prepared for climate change and we want resilient cities. But the bottom line to developers is that it's really makes it more expensive. It means that for an urban infill site, they have to reduce the amount of runoff on the property by like 15 or 20%. So it means putting on green roofs and things that all sound good, like, oh, green roofs, we love that. But like, that's one more thing that makes a unit of a housing less affordable. And I think when you look around Madison and particularly urban infill developments and everything is like this fancy luxury class A, it's not because people are saying like, oh, we need more luxury housing because that's what people demand. It's like, this is what it costs to build any housing. So we have to make it luxury because that's the only price point that can justify the cost of construction without a bunch of other subsidies. So, you know, like TIF and other things can help bridge that gap, but we're also just increasingly making it more expensive to build housing with things that seem like good ideas.
Prioritize, that was the first word that you used, and that really is what comes into play. Leadership and prioritization, who gets to, who decides, and right?
So doesn't that just mean though that we need to pay people more? Like, isn't that, if the cost of the cost is the cost, it seems, I don't know, but.
Right, it's a cycle though, right? I mean, so one says pay more, and then the businesses that can't afford to pay more, I mean, right, it's so you're, yeah. Okay. I want you to go back and think at the beginning of the session about the superpower that you are proud to have and the nemesis power that's working against you. And I would rather end on kind of that positive, because I think that you can, you know, it's those kind of skills and that you have to put into everyday worlds, into your everyday world to make progress on these
hard, adaptive, sticky, messy challenges. So I'd like to end by having you all just populate the chat, if you would, with your superpower first, and then a slash, and your nemesis one that you came up with. Before you do that, just kind of some housekeeping. It does look like Monday, let's see, actually this Thursday from 12 to 1:30. I put this in the chat too. Thursday, 12 to 1:30. And Monday, 1 to 2:30 are the two times that work to get most people who responded. There are a couple who weren't able to do either of those. So I'll send out more info about what that is, what that looks like, and just kind of confirm which day you'll be on, if it still works for your calendar. But really the idea of that is that we're just gonna have a roll up our sleeves, you know, talk about, is it a joint project? If so, what does it look like? And just really kind of go through an exercise and a exercise is probably the wrong word, but kind of a facilitated discussion to get us to progress on the projects, because I know it's an important piece and it looks different now, which is okay, but I just want us to think about that and focus some energy on it in time. And I figured after today's session it didn't make sense, so I hope you are in agreement on that. I figured it was also a way for us to have some momentum to keep on, because I think oftentimes, you know, these sessions, especially when they're virtual, don't lend themselves as well to lingering and talking about your project and then setting up the next date and keeping that momentum going. And I'm finding that the frequency of your get-togethers with your teams is just, it's just less because of the situation. So I want to help facilitate that, so you still have the opportunity to have that experience. Reminder also then to Jim, Andrea, and Nikki that you have reflections for this session. So I'd love to get your thoughts. I always find that it's easiest if you jot them down right after and just send them to us within the next day or so. If you can get them by Friday, for sure, that would be great. And if you have one from previous session that you've been sitting on, or just want to send, you know, a few sentences or notes about takeaways from those previous sessions, they're still welcome. Won't be considered late, or you won't be penalized, but we love to just collect that feedback. All right, so with that, thank you all. Go ahead and populate in the chat, if you would, your superpowers. Current nemesis 2020. Right, awesome. These are great. All right, well, dig deep, folks. Use your superpowers for good. And if there is support that you need from us, please do connect again. If there's any follow-up you want to do with the speakers or anything you heard from, definitely provide us feedback on that. Otherwise, we will continue to move forward. We'll try and get something a little less taxing next time. No, it's hard. It's all hard, and we know that. But thank you so much for your time and your commitment. We will be in touch.
Yeah.